I think one of the challenges of our church today and the culture we live today is I think that a lot of us tend to have that inner circle maybe a bit too wide. And so we have the non-negotiables where we're picking maybe too many hills to die on.
That's really good. This is the Kingdom Advance Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Kingdom Advance Podcast, episode 6. The studio's starting to look good. Can we get a close up on this sign? If you're watching on just the audio, go on over to the YouTube, and go check out the new sign. It's looking good, isn't it, Andrew?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Episode 6, we got Andrew Ward with us. How are you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. So this is the debut of the sign?
This is the debut of the sign.
I feel even more special.
Yeah, you should.
All those other jokers didn't have this.
They didn't at all. So, Andrew, you're are you native of Campbellsville your whole life?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm a transplant from East Tennessee.
East Tennessee.
And I moved up here actually to work at the university in 2000. So I've been here then, I guess, about 20 years. In July, it'll be 20 years. So definitely long enough that it feels like home. Met my wife here. Had all 4 of our kids here. So Campbellsville is home.
Awesome. And let's just give a ministry context background of you.
Okay.
You've been in ministry going on 25 years?
Yeah, something like that. I started doing like internships and things like that in college, which would have been in the late 90s. So I'm pretty old.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, this is the way we phrase it. I'm not really an old man, but I'm not a young man anymore either. So I'm in my mid 40s now.
Okay.
44.
And you now serve as executive pastor at Vineyard Campbellsville.
Correct.
And you've been there around...
I started out part-time, and that's been over 10 years, I think. And I've been full-time about 7 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, so tricked them into hiring me, and they haven't got rid of me yet.
And Vineyard Campbellsville, tell us a little bit just about your experience with Vineyard. It's not been around too long here in Campbellsville, but tell us about this Vineyard movement and how you got involved in it.
Well, for a community like this, the Bible Belt and church on every corner, so to speak, we are a relatively young church. You've got some churches in town that are 100 plus years old, right? So relatively speaking, the Vineyard is pretty young here, and even as a movement, relatively young. Its roots in the Jesus movement and getting going kind of in the late 70s and early 80s. But our church got rolling in 96. That was our year. So we're just a little over 20 years, pushing 25, I guess.
Wow. And so you've almost been there, about half the time, really.
Me personally?
Yes.
I guess a little more than half. So yeah, I came along. Oh, on staff.
On staff,
right? Yeah. I
I
started attending in 2001, around in there. So not long after I moved here, I discovered the Vineyard and got connected fairly quickly.
That's good. And so you've gotten to see it on its best days, worst days.
Yeah, I got in, I guess, for our local church. They were about 5 years into this thing before I arrived. So I wasn't in on the very ground floor, but fairly early. So I've witnessed a lot of our local history anyway.
Yeah. And I asked that just because this episode, I just want to talk about what does it mean to have a healthy, and you can use the term healthy in so many different ways, but what does it mean to have a healthy church today? And I think the Vineyard is going to be a good example of what a healthy church is. You've got people from all walks of life, college students. You got 60-year-olds. The spectrum's so wide when it comes to the Vineyard.
Fairly diverse. Yeah. I do think that can certainly be a sign of health in your church. And some of that's going to be dictated by your community. How diverse is your community? Right. And does your church reflect your community? And I love what our Sunday mornings look like, personally. I would love it if it was even a little more diverse.
Yep.
And so we certainly are endeavoring to be as welcoming as we can, as intentional as we can, to use maybe some overused words, intentionality.
I love it.
But nonetheless, we want to be intentional about reaching out. A lot of that diversity comes from the college. So we have so many international students, students that come from all over, and so we've tried to be a place where college students could feel welcomed and wanted and appreciated. And so we've seen some fruit there. College students there from again, lots of countries, lots of different areas. And then generationally speaking, we're still a young-ish church, so probably the meat of our church is young families, probably around, I guess, where my wife and I are. So kind of that young, some kids,
and even
still
in
the house.
Even in the last 5 years, y'all have seen like babies popping out left and right at your church.
Too many. We're putting a moratorium on the church, like no more babies for a while, at least until maybe we can expand our kids when we're full of babies. So a lot of young families, but not just young families too. We have a growing youth group, and we have some folks that are more seasoned, you could say. So they've been around a little bit longer, but so that's a little bit of the makeup of our church.
And even though everyone's in this area, everyone maybe goes to the same stores, goes to the same restaurants. There's such division just in everyone's culture because you all have so many different walks of life at your church. And we were talking about this. We were talking about unity in a divided culture today, like how to have that. And I think this is perfect timing for this podcast because yesterday, we heard how serious this coronavirus is.
Right, sure.
And this is going to be a time of division or unity in our society, in our nation. How does that play into the church? Unity with a divided culture. How do you bring that together for a healthy church?
Yeah, so that is a great example. You have people, speaking of the virus, you have people that think it's total sham and hoax, and then you have people that are maybe as we speak, getting into their bunkers and planning on not coming out for a year. So you have, polar opposites, and then, of course, there's a lot of people somewhere in between, but the world we live in, social media and so on, all the extreme opinions tend to be out front and center. We have an election coming up, so of course all the the political views that are so polarizing, again, out front and center. And our church is probably like a lot of churches in town. We've got folks that represent probably the whole spectrum, far left, far right, in the middle, and so how as a church do you function? How can you serve the community at large? How can you serve the folks that are within your four walls, and then of course the outside the walls as well? So it's a challenge that is not unique to the Vineyard. It's a challenge, I think, probably for all the churches in town. So how do you do it? Am I supposed to tell you? I thought you were going to tell me how you.
No, I'm relaying that back to you.
Oh, so I'm supposed to have the answer.
Yeah, okay. Unity. How do we do it?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and so I'm just going to give you, I guess, some of my thoughts. That there's going to be a lot of people smarter than me watching this podcast that'll think, "Oh, that's dumb."
No, we don't.
But here's some of my thoughts. I think most of us have. I think of it in terms of circles. So believers, I think, predominantly have like these non-negotiables. Okay, so these are the things that I don't think I could let go of. That I can't waver on. These are the hills that I die on, so to speak. In terms of this is what I believe, and there's no change in my mind, and so on. These are the non-negotiables of my faith. And then there's maybe a little bit of an outer circle, a step out from there that, these are things that I firmly believe. These are some things that you're probably not going to convince me otherwise. but I can at least have some grace for you if you see some of these things differently.
Yeah.
I can maybe at least see how you can look at Scripture and find a different view or a different interpretation, and I can respect, and we can kind of coexist in that space, even though I'm probably not going to change my view there, right? So there's kind of that outer work. And then there's maybe another level where it's like you can see some things and just recognize, I have no idea what the answer is here.
Yeah.
Maybe I have some opinions, but I don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so you have even more grace for people that have their ideas and so on. And so I think one of the challenges of our church today and the culture we live today is, I think, that a lot of us tend to have that inner circle maybe a bit too wide. Ooh. And so we have the non-negotiables where we're picking maybe too many hills to die on.
That's really good.
And I think that's one of the challenges of the church is, we should identify some things that, this is, at the very core, and I'm not budging from this, but what can we do to make that second space a little bit larger where, I believe these things, and I believe them pretty firmly, and you believe some things are a little different, but we can coexist here. We can still pull in the same direction in a lot of ways. We can have relationship. We can have friendship. We can certainly be respectful in some of these things. And maybe it would be good if we could be more selective on those hills that we choose to die on, because you survey social media and it just seems like we're choosing to fight every single battle. And
do you think, do you call it a soft culture? Like people who get offended too often, like, is that one of the issues, that inner circle's too wide, too big? There's too many, like, I'm not changing my beliefs, whatever. And I'm not going to that church because they believe this and I don't believe that. Like, is that why? Sure.
I think maybe that plays into it. Sure. Yeah, we're in a culture where people get offended too easily. I think that's some of it. I think we can go too far the other direction and think along the lines of, okay, if you're offended by something, I say it's your fault, right? Yeah. So there's extremes like everything else. So again, I think the best space is probably somewhere in the middle. Maybe don't be so quick to be offended. Some of us could work on that, and then some of us could also come toward the middle and not be so insensitive, not be so careless. Or inconsiderate of other people. I agree.
And something I've realized about the Vineyard is, from my perspective, you're one of the most diverse churches in the community. Okay. And with that being said, you guys give a platform to just your regular church members. That's something I've realized throughout my 3 years here, is there's always new people speaking. There's always, women who are preaching, men who are preaching, not just leaders in the church, but just church members who may been going there for years. Yeah. Like, how important is that in unity and allowing, like, your church to have a voice and not just, this pastor preaches, and that's it. Like, how important is that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. John Wimber is probably the most well-known founder. He wasn't the sole founder, but he was the most recognizable name that kind of helped propel the Vineyard forward in its early days. And he had an expression that he used. He would say, in the Vineyard, everyone gets to play. And so we have tried to make that sort of a core value. Yeah. We call it equipping the saints, and we have a list of our own DNA. That every church has their own DNA. So whether you're Southern Baptist, you're going to have some distinctives even from other Southern Baptists that make your church your own fingerprints, so to speak. And so one of our DNA, which happens to, I think, coincide with the Vineyard Movement as a whole, but the one that we've tried to lean into is equipping the saints, or everyone gets to play. I love it. And so we've tried to not lean into the superstar upfront form of Christianity and church life. So it's great to have a good, strong pastor and a good, strong worship leader. We feel like we have a great pastor, and he's charismatic, and he's an incredible teacher, and he brings a lot to the table. It's Adam Russell's our pastor. But we don't want it to be the Adam show, and we don't want it to be the Andrew show and the Glenn Yoder and other folks that happen to be on staff. So we do actively try and give platform and opportunities away. And we don't do it flippantly. So we do try and do as much training and things that we can. We have a preaching team, so we periodically invite folks in and work on the craft, so to speak. It's just one example. We have different worship leaders that that they work. They train in things, but we never want it to be presented as He had another expression too that he used called that he would say the meat is in the streets, and so that's one of the things we try to emphasize is Sunday mornings are important. They're great. They really are. They're critical. But most of what happens should be outside.
That's good.
The walls. So if we talk a lot about the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus talked about the kingdom quite a bit, and that seemed to be the emphasis of his ministry, is extending the kingdom of heaven into the present, and that can come in a lot of ways. It can come from leading someone to the Lord, right? It can come through, that salvation moment, but it's not just that. That's just sort of the beginning. It's praying for the sick. It's taking care of the poor and the needy, and there's all these different ways that the kingdom can be extended, and most of that happens outside the walls of the church. And so that's what we want to model. That it's not about these few people; it's about all of you. And so most of the people that they end up coming to the Vineyard, most of the salvations or the people that get baptized, some of that happens when we do our altar calls. We essentially do altar calls after church and invite people to come up and receive prayer. And some of that happens from Adam or some of our leaders reaching out to people, but most of it happens relationally through other
really
people
good.
That's
really good. So the Kingdom Advance podcast. How do we advance the kingdom?
There you go.
There it is. It's in the body. It's
Right.
not in just the head of the church.
Right.
And I think it's human nature to judge, especially church, to judge how successful, how effective by the amount. Hey, we had this many baptisms this Sunday.
Sure.
We had this many people show up. I mean, that's great, but what's happening throughout the week with those people?
Sure.
And when you talk about that with a healthy church, when do you realize our church is healthy? When do you realize we are doing something effective? Because it's not boastful. You have to have those moments in ministry where you're like, all right, what we're doing is really good. Let's keep the fire going. Yeah. So when do you know a church is healthy? When do you identify?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of signs, and those things you mentioned certainly can be signs. Obviously, they can be signs that something's happening at your church, and they can be misleading too. You can have a big emphasis on things that are a bit more entertaining, and you can attract crowds, and that may or may not be a sign of a healthy church, but it can be at the same time, right? But those numbers either way can be a bit misleading. So maybe your church may be completely healthy, but if you're a church, say like ours, or some churches that have a heavy college component, and you frequently have people that they're with you for a while, and then maybe this is a big senior class, right? And you've just got a lot of people that just move away. They're not mad at your church. You haven't done anything wrong, but you just
that's that's healthy right there. Sending people,
Sure, right, yeah, no, absolutely. Or maybe you've sent a church off to plant. You've taken a core group of people and they're going to go to another community. So the numbers game can be a sign, but it isn't certainly the only sign. So what are some other things? No, I don't know. I think there's something to be said for stability. It's nice when you don't have just perpetual turnover in leadership, although there's maybe a space there where you don't want to get totally stagnant. So, okay, you've had the same church staff and no changes for 40 years. Okay. Yeah. Maybe that's not always great. Yeah. But there's, I think, something to be said for some continuity. That can maybe be a sign. I think when you see, like discipleship, leadership development, so, you see more and more being given away for folks to do. I think that's can be a good sign.
That's good. And you talk about stagnant. Are there any moments that stick out to you specifically about the Vineyard where, because you've been riding on this roller coaster for a little while. Are there any moments where the church just went through a tough time and what was the formula to getting out of that or something? Sure.
Two things come to mind. One, the broader Vineyard, and then also our local Vineyard. So both of those things come to mind. So the Vineyard as a movement went through quite a transition around the time that they hit about the 300 church mark or so. And so
300 churches.
When they got to that spot, they really had to kind of shuffle the deck and think, okay, how are we going to care for these churches? We're going to have to do some things differently for accountability, for organization, and that was a tough transition because you have the word you can use. There's a book called Quest for the Radical Middle that kind of goes through the Vineyard history, but you have pioneers and you have homesteaders, right? So you have pioneers that are in on the ground level and they have certain views and ideas of how to get this thing going, and then there comes this time where you need this next round of people that are going to hold it down, and there's usually this transition.
Yeah, there is.
And so I guess one of our moments of transition came when we transitioned from Ray Hollenbach to Adam Russell.
Yeah.
So Ray was our pastor for, I think, did he hit 10 years? I think he hit 10 years.
Ray's awesome. He's a professor here at Campbellsville.
Well, and I think this, at least from my view, this felt unique. Maybe it's not, but it seemed unique to me because, sometimes pastors, they don't want to hand their position over. Maybe there may be a lot of signs.
Sometimes the church does.
So a lot of times that could be kind of a fracturing moment, a difficult moment. So to me, our story feels a little unique because Ray and maybe a few of the other elders of the church just felt. Adam was the worship pastor at the time, and they just felt like the Lord was highlighting Adam, speaking to everyone, including Ray.
Yeah,
it's time to make space for Adam.
And Ray's very aware.
Yeah.
He's very in the presence, very aware. And, if he's hearing something, it's probably correct. But
so this was not a matter where Ray's position needed to be wrestled from him. He freely stepped aside and just kind of invited Adam into that. And then furthermore, Ray even, and this can be awkward, sometimes. Ray even continued on staff for a while, for about a year, and then he transitioned and went on to some other things. And just the way that all of that felt unique, and I always appreciated how that transition went. But that was a transition that I wouldn't say necessarily all of it was easy. Transitions are never easy. But it was the right thing at the right time. And so I think one mark of a healthy church is just trying to be obedient, to join in what the Lord's doing when He's doing it, even if it's not necessarily easy. Or sometimes maybe even doesn't make sense.
That's really good. Yeah. And if someone was listening to this, watching this, that maybe they're planting a church, or maybe they've been at the same church their entire life, and they're just at this point where they're a leader in the church, but they're not maybe seeing growth. They're not seeing that healthy aspect. What would you say to them as a final question for you? What do you do through those times?
As a church planter?
A church planter, just a church leader, and not seeing the fruit, not seeing from the inside looking out. You know, you're in a leadership position, you're looking out at the church, and you're just not seeing that health. You're not seeing people wanting to, you know, come to church, not motivated. What would you say to them in this moment? Like,
well, one of the big things, and this, you know, that's a big question, so I don't know if we have time to unpack it, because there's a lot of things you look for, but I would start with, if you, as leaders, and we talk about this as a staff quite a bit, as leaders, if you want a healthy church, you need to be healthy yourselves. And so as much as leaders, you can have your own accountability, as much as you cannot put pressure on yourselves to be perfect, you can give yourself some space to acknowledge your own weaknesses and the spaces where you could use help. You could use your own counseling. Like, there's such a stigma around that, but anything that a leader can do and then I'm talking about beyond like self-care, which is kind of a popular term, and that's fine, but I'm talking about something maybe a little bit deeper than that. Like, how can you be healthy?
That's good.
And as you're healthy, as your team is healthy, then Lord willing, that will gravitate out into,
and something you guys do as a staff is, you've had people come in and you've taken these personality tests, these
we do some different
strengths
things.
And weaknesses tests, because it's very important as leadership to know what you're weak in and what someone else is strong in, because those can correlate. What you're weak in can be what someone else is strong in, and then it makes up for the slack.
Sure. And there's no silver bullets, and that's good to acknowledge too. So it's good to take a multifaceted approach to, you know, to constantly evaluate. Okay, how are we? Are we healthy? Are we good? And to continue to lean into ways to make yourselves, you know, healthier. And that's one thing that has served us well. And I think as long as we continue to seek that out, hopefully that'll help us stay well as a body.
I love it. And we appreciate what Vineyard Campbellsville does for the entire community, what you do for the university and the community. So thank you for coming on, and I hope anyone listening, that was just a little bit of an encouragement. I know for me, I've always had a heart for church planting. So just hearing you talk about, you know, you going through tough times, unity through division, like, so it's a good talk. And so appreciate you coming on. That's a wrap for episode 6 of the Kingdom Advance podcast. Until next time.